Bob Marley's legacy arrived long before the world was ready to name it. He became the sound of resistance for the oppressed, the hymn of hope for the displaced, and the spiritual voice of a generation that had never seen itself reflected on a global stage. From the narrow lanes of Trenchtown to sold-out arenas across continents, Marley carried Jamaica with him, not as an image, but as a living truth. Yet behind the anthems of unity and redemption was a life marked by rejection, poverty, violence, spiritual struggle, and decisions that ultimately cost him his life. He was born Nesta Robert Marley on February 6, 1945, in the rural village of 9 Mile, St. Ann Parish, Jamaica, a place where red dirt clung to bare feet and survival depended on resilience. His mother, Cedella Booker, was only 18 years old, a black Jamaican teenager raising a child in a society still shaped by colonial hierarchies. His father, Norval Sinclair Marley, was a white Jamaican of English descent, a former captain in the British Royal Marines and decades older than Cedella. Norval's presence in Bob's life was fleeting. He lived apart from his son, offered little emotional connection, and died when Bob was just 10 years old, leaving behind questions that would echo through Marley's identity. In 9 Mile, Bob was raised largely by his mother and his maternal grandfather, Omariah Malcolm. The countryside offered simplicity, but not comfort. Life was quiet, but it was never easy. From an early age, Bob learned what it meant to stand between worlds, too black for some, too white for others. That sense of not fully belonging would follow him wherever he went. When Bob was 12, Cedella moved him to Trenchtown, a government housing project in Kingston. The shift was jarring. Gone were the open hills. In their place stood overcrowded yards, zinc fences, and streets humming with tension. Trenchtown was poor, volatile, and alive with sound. It was also where Bob faced relentless bullying for being biracial. Children mocked him, questioned his identity, and treated his difference as a weakness. But Trenchtown also gave him something else: music. It was there that Bob reconnected with his childhood friend, Bunny Wailer, and soon after met Peter Tosh. Music spilled out of yards and sound systems, stitched together by rhythm and survival. Bob absorbed it all. He left school early, attending Stepney Primary and Junior High School in 9 Mile before briefly enrolling in several Kingston schools. Formal education ended when he was just 14. For a short time, he trained as a welder's apprentice, working with fire and metal, trying to make a living with his hands. One day, a piece of hot steel flew into his eye. The pain was sharp and blinding, but it clarified something deeper. Bob walked away from welding and never looks back. Music was no longer a dream, it was the only path. His real education came not from classrooms, but from the streets and from mentors like Joe Higgs, a local singer who became known as the father of reggae. Higgs taught Bob and the other young Wailers how to harmonize, write, and perform, not with sheet music, but with discipline and purpose. At the same time, Marley immersed himself in Rastafari, drawing heavily from the teachings of Marcus Garvey, whose philosophy of black pride, self-determination, and African redemption reshaped Bob's worldview. In 1962, at just 16 years old, Bob recorded his first songs, Judge Not and One Cup of Coffee. The records barely made a ripple, but a year later, everything changed. In 1963, Bob, Bunny Wailer, and Peter Tosh formed the Wailers. Under the guidance of Joe Higgs and producer Clement Coxone Dodd at Studio One, they released Simmer Down in 1964. The song exploded across Jamaica, capturing the anger of Kingston's youth and marking the arrival of a new voice that refused to be ignored. As the years passed, the Wailers evolved, moving from ska to rocksteady, then into the deeper, slower pulse of reggae. Their collaboration with Lee Scratch Perry produced spiritually charged tracks like Soul Rebel and 400 Years. The music grew heavier, more political, more dangerous. By 1974, internal tensions led Peter Tosh and Bunny Wailer to leave the group. Bob stepped forward as the unmistakable center, and the band became Bob Marley and the Wailers. Signing with Island Records and producer Chris Blackwell changed everything. Albums like Catch a Fire, Burnin', and Natty Dread carried reggae beyond Jamaica's shores. Then came No Woman No Cry, Exodus, Kaya, and Uprising. Songs like One Love, Three Little Birds, Redemption Song, and Get Up Stand Up became global prayers. Marley was no longer just a musician, he was a movement. Exodus would later be named Time magazine's Album of the Century. But fame did not shield him from danger. In 1976, Jamaica was torn apart by violent political rivalry between the PNP and JLP. Though Marley claimed neutrality, his decision to perform at the PNP-linked Smile Jamaica concert made him a target. 2 days before the event, gunmen stormed his home at 56 Hope Road. Bullets tore through walls and bodies. Bob was shot, Rita Marley was wounded, and manager Don Taylor nearly died. Still bleeding, Bob took the stage anyway. He later left Jamaica, returning in 1978 to unite rival political leaders on stage in the One Love Peace concert, forcing them to shake hands before the world. Marley's personal life was as complex as his public image. He married Rita Marley in 1966, and she remained his wife until his death. She was his partner, backup singer, and spiritual companion. Yet, their marriage was not exclusive. Bob had multiple relationships and fathered 11 acknowledged children, raising a blended family shaped by Rastafarian beliefs and personal contradictions. Rita later alleged abuse in her memoir, complicating the legacy of a man whose music preached love and justice. Spiritually, Marley viewed marijuana not as recreation, but as a sacrament, a tool for meditation and communion. His use led to arrests and controversy, and later criticism of how his image has been commercialized to sell cannabis products. In 1977, Bob was diagnosed with acral lentiginous melanoma after an injury to his toe. Doctors recommended amputation. He refused. Rastafari taught that the body must remain whole. The cancer spread. By 1981, Bob Marley was dying. He passed away on May 11, 1981, at just 36 years old. At the time of his death, his estate was worth an estimated $30 million, but he had no will. His refusal to acknowledge mortality triggered decades of legal battles involving his widow, children, and business partners. Today, the Marley empire, music, licensing, and global branding is valued at over $500 million, with Legend remaining the best-selling reggae album of all time. Bob Marley left behind homes in 9 Mile, 56 Hope Road, and Miami. He left behind Tough Gong Studios, a song catalog that still shapes culture, and a single restored Land Rover that symbolized his humility. More than anything, he left behind a voice that refuses to fade. Bob Marley did not live long, but he lived loudly, spiritually, and unapologetically. His life was imperfect, his choices often controversial, yet his message continues to outlive the man himself. Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None with ourselves can free our minds.